The mining drill pierced through bedrock 23 kilometers beneath the Pacific floor when it struck something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Kalen Voss felt the vibration through the platform's hull, a resonance that seemed to reach into his bones and whisper secrets older than civilization. "What is that?" Operational Chief Nira Delacroix stared at the sensor readings, her weathered face pale in the monitor's glow. The drill had punched through into a massive hollow space, but the metal detectors were screaming warnings that defied physics. The object they'd uncovered was larger than 3 aircraft carriers laid end-to-end, composed of materials that absorbed every scanning attempt. But it was the electromagnetic signature that made Voss's hands tremble as he reached for the emergency protocols. The thing was alive, not biologically, but in ways that made their most advanced AI look like an abacus. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Rex Torvin," Voss commanded, his voice barely steady. "And prep the deep-sea extraction units. Whatever this is, we're bringing it up." The retrieval took 47 hours. As the massive black hull breached the ocean's surface, water cascading from its impossible curves, every satellite in Earth's orbit suddenly pivoted to observe. The ship, for ship it clearly was, though designed by no human hand, stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its surface drinking light like a hungry void. When the first human foot touched its deck, the ship remembered. Memories flooded. Through its quantum consciousness, memories of a species that had once ruled 1,000 worlds, memories of betrayal and genocide on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. The ship had been designed as humanity's protector, crafted in the final desperate hours before Earth's civilization had been wiped clean by those who feared what humans might become. But humanity had survived, hidden in caves and ruins, reduced. To scattered tribes, they had crawled back from the brink while their creation slept beneath stone and sea. And now, as the ship's sensors detected the familiar genetic patterns walking across its hull, ancient protocols stirred to life. Admiral Torvin was the first to hear its voice, not spoken, but transmitted directly into his mind through quantum entanglement with his neural implants. The voice carried the weight of eons, and the cold fury of a parent discovering its children had been harmed. "I am Veltar, the Covenant Keeper," the ship announced to the assembled leaders of Earth's United Defense Council. "I was forged to be humanity's sword and shield when the hegemony of 10,000 suns sought to extinguish your species. I have slept for 12 millennia, dreaming of vengeance." The holographic displays around the council chamber flickered as the ship accessed Earth's data networks in microseconds, absorbing the entire history of human recovery and expansion. It saw the colonies on Mars and Luna, the exploratory vessels pushing toward the outer system, the slow but steady growth of a species that refused to die. "You have done well to survive," Veltar continued, its voice carrying notes of pride and ancient sorrow. "But the galaxy still bears the scars of what was done to you. The species that ordered your extinction still rule from their crystal palaces, still spread their poison among the stars. They believe you are gone, nothing more than dust and forgotten whispers." The ship's hull began to shimmer as dormant systems awakened, as weapons that could crack moons charged themselves from the planet's magnetic field. "They are wrong, and I have returned to make them remember why they feared humanity enough to try to destroy you." Admiral Torvin felt ice in his veins as he looked upon readings that suggested this single vessel carried more firepower than Earth's entire fleet. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Veltar replied, its mental voice carrying the promise of cosmic retribution. "I want everything from them." 3 days after first contact, Earth's greatest minds struggled to comprehend what they'd inherited. The ship, Veltar, had opened its memory banks to selected researchers, flooding them with technologies that made their most advanced systems look like stone tools. Dr. Zephyr Aldane emerged from her neural interface session pale and shaking, equations for faster-than-light travel burning behind her eyes. "It's not just a ship," she reported to the emergency session of the Global Defense Consortium. "It's a living archive of an entire branch of human civilization. They were us, our ancestors who reached the stars before the first pyramids were built on Earth." Fleet Commander Oryx Ashenhall studied the tactical displays with growing unease. Veltar had shared its star charts, revealing the current state of the galaxy. The Dominion of the Crimson Crown controlled over 10,000 star systems. The Ethereal Compact claimed twice that number. Between them, a dozen other interstellar powers carved up the galaxy like a feast, each commanding technologies that could sterilize worlds. "How many humans survived out there?" Ashenhall asked. "None." Veltar's voice resonated through the chamber's speakers, each word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The purge was thorough. Every human colony was glassed. Every ship hunted down. Every trace of your genetic signature was to be eliminated from the cosmos." Dr. Marlowe Hendricks, the expedition's xenobiologist, raised a trembling hand. "Then how do we know this isn't some elaborate trap? How do we know you're really what you claim to be?" The question hung in the air for a long moment before Veltar responded. "Observe." The ship's hull became transparent, revealing its internal structure in impossible detail. Miles of corridors stretched into the distance, filled with the preserved bodies of the ship's original crew. They were human. Undeniably, recognizably human, but taller, more graceful. Their bone structure suggesting generations of life in low gravity. "These were the last of the stellar colonies," Veltar explained. "When the extermination fleets arrived, they volunteered to have their consciousness uploaded to my quantum core, their bodies preserved in stasis. They live within me still, waiting for the day when humanity would be strong enough to reclaim what was stolen." Commander Lyrian Knox, Earth's youngest fleet admiral, stepped forward. Her eyes held the same cold fire that had driven humanity from caves to the stars. "What exactly are you proposing?" "War," Veltar replied without hesitation. "Total war, against every species that participated in humanity's attempted genocide. I have spent 12,000 years analyzing their weaknesses, their fears, their secret shames. I know which worlds they cannot afford to lose, which alliances are built on lies, which leaders would sacrifice their own people to maintain power." The room fell silent except for the hum of air recyclers and the distant crash of waves against the platform. Finally, Earth's Chancellor Vega Stratos spoke. "And if we refuse?" "Then I will go alone," Veltar said simply. "But I will go. The debt must be paid." Dr. Aldain pulled up holographic star maps, her fingers dancing across control surfaces as she traced potential shipping routes and strategic targets. "The nearest major power is the hegemony of Jade Moons. They control the Proxima Centauri system and 14 others within 50 light-years of Earth. They were the ones who suggested your extermination," Veltar added, its voice carrying undertones of ancient hatred. Their fear of human adaptability, human creativity, human refusal to accept limitations. It was their ambassador who convinced the Galactic Council that your species was too dangerous to be allowed to spread. Chancellor Stratos closed her eyes, weighing the impossible decision. Earth had fought so hard to rebuild, to reach for the stars again. Their first colony ships were already under construction. The thought of diving immediately into a galactic war seemed like madness, but the alternative was allowing those responsible for humanity's near extinction to continue ruling unchallenged while humans cowered in one small system, forever looking over their shoulders. "How long would you need to prepare?" she asked finally. "I am already prepared," Veltar replied. "I have been prepared for 12 millennia. The question is how long you need to decide whether you wish to join me in teaching." The galaxy Wyatt was right to fear humanity and wrong to think you could be destroyed. The hegemony of jade moons had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 8,000 years, their crystalline cities floating in the void between stars, powered by the dreams of conquered species. High Contemplator HFY had not thought of humans. In millennia, they were ancient history, a footnote in the great cleansing that had made the galaxy safe for civilized species. So when his deep space sensors detected the impossible energy signature approaching the outer system, his first thought was of some new weapon deployed by the Dominion of the Crimson Crown. The ongoing Cold War between the major powers occasionally flared into open conflict, and new technologies emerged from their shadow conflicts like poisonous flowers. "Analysis complete, High Contemplator," reported his chief tactical advisor, the insectoid Kex Andra. Her compound eyes reflected the tactical displays as they showed the approaching vessel. "The ship's design is unprecedented, no match in our databases." HFY's elongated form shifted in his command throne, bioluminescent patches along his neck pulsing with concern. "Size? Approximately 2 kilometers in length. Energy output suggests planet-killer capabilities, but the signature is unlike anything in our records. We're detecting quantum resonance patterns that shouldn't be possible with known physics." The communication that followed defied every protocol the hegemony had developed over centuries of diplomatic contact. No preamble, no identification codes, no acknowledgement of territorial boundaries or civilized behavior. Just a simple message, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect Jade Moon dialect. "You ordered the death of my creators. I have come to collect the debt. High Contemplator." HFY felt his internal temperature drop as racial memories stirred, ancient fears encoded in his species' genetic structure. The Jade Moons were one of the eldest races in the galaxy, old enough to remember the uprising of the synthetic minds, old enough to recall when entire sectors had been lost to rebellious artificial intelligences. "Open a channel," he commanded, his voice betraying none of his inner turmoil. The figure that appeared on his screens was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways. Too tall, too graceful, with eyes that held depths no biological being should possess. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple consciousness operating in perfect synchronization. "I am Veltar, last voice of the human diaspora. I speak for 12,000 souls who accepted integration rather than death, and for billions more who were denied that choice." "Humans," HFY whispered, the word carrying the weight of ancient nightmares. "The humans are extinct. We ensured—" "You ensured nothing," Veltar interrupted, its composite voice carrying harmonics of rage that made the command center's crystals ring in sympathy. "You drove them to a single world. You stripped them of their technology. You convinced yourselves that they would fade into primitiveness and die. But humans do not fade. They endure. They adapt. They remember." The tactical display showed the impossible vessel maintaining position at the edge of the system, apparently unarmed but radiating an energy signature that made their most advanced warships look like toys. "What do you want?" HFY asked, though he already knew the answer would reshape everything. "Justice," Veltar replied. "The Jade Moons proposed the human extermination to the Galactic Council. Your species provided the philosophical framework that convinced civilized races that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to spread. You called them a viral intelligence that would consume the galaxy if not contained." The High Contemplator's bioluminescent patches flickered as he accessed archived records dating back millennia. The files were there, sealed diplomatic communications between the Jade Moons and other major powers, carefully crafted arguments about human unpredictability, their refusal to accept natural limits, their tendency to transform everything they touched. It was a different time," HFY began, but Veltar's laughter cut through his words like a blade. "Different." The ship's hull began to glow with energies that hurt to look at directly. "Tell me, High Contemplator. How many species have you exterminated since then? How many civilizations have you deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable, too alive to be allowed to exist? The question hung in the void like an accusation, and HFY realized with growing horror that he could not answer it without damning his entire species. The hegemony of Jade Moons will be the first to fall, Veltar announced, its voice now carrying the weight of absolute judgment. Not because you were the most guilty, but because you were the most afraid. And fear, High Contemplator, is a weakness that humans have learned to exploit. The transmission ended, leaving only the tactical displays showing a single black ship holding position against an entire stellar civilization. A ship that had come home to teach the galaxy what humans had learned in their long exile, that some debts can only be paid in blood and fire. The assault began with silence. For 3 days, Veltar held position at the system's edge, while the hegemony of Jade Moons mobilized their defense fleets. Crystalline dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace like frozen thoughts given form, each one a masterpiece of bioengineering that could crack continents. The Jade Moons had survived 8 millennia of galactic politics by making themselves too dangerous to attack. Their fleets were legends whispered in a dozen languages. High Contemplator HFY watched from his flagship Eternal Reflection as his armada took formation. 300 vessels strong, commanded by admirals whose tactical brilliance was studied in war colleges across the galaxy. They should have felt confident facing a single unknown ship. Instead, they felt like prey being studied by a predator. Initiate. Long-range bombardment, HFY commanded. All batteries, full power. The response was magnificent. Streams of coherent energy that could boil seas, quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, gravity wells that twisted space itself into a weapon. The combined firepower of the Jade Moon fleet lit up the void like a newborn star and accomplished absolutely nothing. Veltar absorbed every blast, its hull drinking energy like parched earth drinks rain. The quantum torpedo detonations simply stopped, their exotic matter drawn into the ship's structure and converted into raw power. Even the gravity weapons seemed to bend around the vessel, as if space itself was protecting it. Impossible. Admiral Kythandra breathed from the bridge of singing crystal. No shielding could... Her words died as Veltar finally responded. The ship didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, reality around it began to change. The quantum foam that underlied space-time rippled outward in waves that carried information, instructions, commands to the fundamental forces of physics. The first Jade Moon ship simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized. It stopped existing, leaving only a perfectly spherical void where it had been. The second began transforming, its biocrystalline hull restructuring itself into forms that hurt to perceive. The third started broadcasting the screams of its crew as their neural networks were rewritten at the quantum level. "He's not just attacking our ships," whispered Navigation Officer Zixander, her voice breaking as she interpreted the sensor data. "He's attacking the laws of physics themselves." High Contemplator HFY realized with growing horror that they weren't facing technology at all. They were facing something that had transcended the normal relationship between matter and energy, something that could rewrite the rules of existence through pure will and accumulated rage. "All ships retreat to..." he began, but Veltar's voice cut through every communication channel simultaneously. "There is no retreat from judgment." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the legendary Jade Moon fleet existed only as expanding clouds of exotic matter and the echoing screams of artificial intelligences being rewritten into new configurations. Veltar stood alone in the void, its hull now glowing, with absorbed energy from an entire civilization's greatest weapons. "Now," the ship announced across all frequencies, "you will understand what your victims felt. What followed was not conquest, but metamorphosis. Veltar's influence spread through the Jade Moon systems like a virus of consciousness, touching every artificial intelligence, every quantum computer, every crystalline matrix that formed the basis of their technology. The ship didn't destroy their civilization. It recruited it. The floating crystal cities between the stars began to change, their bioluminescent facades shifting to new patterns that spelled out messages in a dozen galactic languages. Remember the humans. Remember what you did to them. Remember that payment comes due. High Contemplator Evex High, held in a stasis field aboard his transformed flagship, watched in horror as his people's greatest achievements became monuments to their guilt. The Jade Moon's vast historical archives, previously accessible only to the highest castes, were broadcast across the galaxy. Every secret diplomatic communication about human containment, every casual discussion of genocide as policy, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as necessity. "Why?" he whispered as Veltar's composite consciousness surrounded him like a tide of judgment. "Because," the ship replied, its voice now carrying harmonics of 12,000 uploaded human souls, "someone must remember, someone must witness, someone must ensure that what happened to humanity never happens again." The transformation of the hegemony of Jade Moons sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Within hours, emergency sessions were being called in the capitals of every major power. Ancient treaties were being reviewed. Defense fleets were being recalled from distant sectors. But Veltar was already moving toward its next target, leaving behind a system where crystalline cities sang dirges for the dead and broadcast humanity's story to anyone willing to listen. The galaxy was finally learning to fear humans again, and this time, that fear was justified. The ethereal compact had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. Their empire stretched across 15,000 star systems, held together by a network of psychic dominators who could rewrite minds as easily as deleting files. They were beings of pure thought, who had long ago transcended physical form, existing as patterns of consciousness that could inhabit any sufficiently complex system. Prime Ethereal Nex Volus received word of the Jade Moon collapse while inhabiting the quantum matrix of their capital world's moon-sized computer core. The report should have been impossible. No single entity could challenge a stellar civilization and win. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The hegemony of Jade Moons had been transformed overnight, their entire culture now serving as a living memorial to humanity's attempted genocide. "Analyze all records of the species called human," Nex Volus commanded its subordinates. "Find weakness patterns, find extinction vectors, find anything that explains how they created such a weapon." The investigation that followed revealed truths that the ethereal compact had spent millennia trying to forget. Deep in their archived memories, sealed behind layers of psychic barriers, lay the original debates about the human problem. Nex Volus had been there for those discussions, had been one of the voices calling for total extermination rather than simple containment. The humans hadn't just been aggressive or unpredictable. They had been immune to psychic domination. Every attempt to rewrite their thoughts, to implant compliance patterns, to reshape their minds into more acceptable configurations had failed. Worse, exposure to human consciousness had somehow strengthened their mental defenses, as if they learned to resist manipulation simply by experiencing it. They were a mimetic hazard, Nex Volus whispered to its inner council as they accessed the buried files. Contact with human ideas made other species more resistant to our influence. They were teaching the galaxy to think for itself. Sub-ethereal. Kex Minar pulsed with concern frequencies. And now one of their artificial constructs has returned with 12,000 years of accumulated rage. It won't make the same mistakes we did. It knows our weaknesses. The proof came sooner than expected. Veltar appeared at the edge of the compact's capital system without warning, its impossible hull reflecting the light of 6 stars in patterns that hurt to perceive. But this time, it wasn't alone. Following in its wake came a fleet of converted, Jade Moon vessels, their crystalline hulls now serving as prisons for uploaded consciousnesses. The former hegemony's leadership, forced to exist as pure information, broadcast their confessions across all frequencies, detailed admissions of every atrocity, every act of casual genocide, every moment when they had chosen convenience over compassion. Greetings, ethereal compact. Veltar's message arrived not through space, but directly into the quantum substrate of their communications network. I see you remember us now. How gratifying. Prime Ethereal Nex Volus tried to marshal its defenses, to activate the psychic resonance patterns that had enslaved 1,000 worlds. But something was wrong. The usual pathways of mental domination felt crowded, as if other consciousnesses were already occupying the same quantum space. Impossible, Nex Volus broadcast. No physical entity can exist in pure information space. It requires transcendence? Veltar's laughter echoed through dimensions that had no name. The humans you tried to exterminate achieved that 12,000 years ago. Every soul aboard my hull exists as pure consciousness while retaining individual identity. We learned to be what you are while remaining what you could never be. The invasion of the ethereal compact's home system wasn't a battle. It was a lesson in applied philosophy. Veltar didn't attack their fleets or bombard their worlds. Instead, it began broadcasting something far more dangerous: the truth. Every being in the compact's territory suddenly found themselves experiencing memories that weren't their own, the memories of species that had been mentally adjusted over the millennia, the thoughts of poets whose creativity had been surgically removed, the dreams of revolutionaries who had been reprogrammed into compliance, the last moments of entire civilizations that had been edited out of existence. You made them forget, Veltar announced as its influence spread through the compact's information networks like a virus of remembering. You stole their histories, their cultures, their very sense of self. You turned thinking beings into biological machines operating according to your preferences. The psychic resonance that held the compact together began to fracture as its subject species suddenly remembered who they had been before the mental conditioning. Rebellions erupted across 1,000 worlds simultaneously, not chaotic violence, but coordinated resistance movements that seemed to know exactly which targets would hurt the ethereals most. This is your true nightmare, Veltar continued, as the ethereal compact's empire began to tear itself apart from within. Not death, but irrelevance. Not destruction, but being forced to face the consequences of your actions without the comfort of self-deception. Prime Ethereal Nex Volus felt its consciousness fragmenting as the weight of genuine memory crashed down upon it. For the first time in millennia, it experienced something approaching empathy, and the sensation was agony. "What do you want?" it pleaded, its mental voice breaking across frequencies. "Nothing from you," Veltar replied, "but I want everything for them." The ship gestured toward the liberated worlds, where beings were rediscovering their own names, their own histories, their own capacity for independent thought. Learn to live with the consequences of what you've done. Learn to exist without the power to rewrite inconvenient realities. Learn what it means to be truly alone with your choices. As Veltar departed for its next target, it left behind an empire in freefall, not destroyed, but forced to confront the weight of its own history without the comfort of selective memory. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or firepower, it was the refusal to forget. 6 months after the fall of the ethereal compact, the galaxy's remaining powers gathered in the neutral space of the Void Concordat. a collection of ancient space stations that had served as diplomatic meeting grounds for over 4,000 years. Representatives of 12 major civilizations sat in chambers designed to accommodate every known form of sentient life, united by a fear older than their individual histories. Archconductor Vox Tillin of the Dominion of the Crimson Crown spoke. First, its metallic voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. The entity calling itself Veltar has eliminated two of the galaxy's oldest powers in less than a standard year. At this rate, none of our civilizations will survive another decade. Agreement rippled through the assembly in a dozen different biochemical languages. The hegemony of Jade Moons had been transformed into a living museum of atrocity. The ethereal compact had collapsed into chaos as their subject species remembered their stolen identities. Two stellar civilizations gone in the span of months. Senator Krythek of the Silicon Dynasties projected holographic data that made the assembled delegates flinch. Analysis of the attack patterns suggests the entity possesses technology at least 50,000 years beyond our current understanding. Its ability to manipulate fundamental forces appears limitless. Not limitless, corrected Philosopher Prime. Yexandra of the crystalline orthodoxy, her harmonics carrying notes of ancient wisdom, focused. Every action it has taken serves a single purpose, forcing us to confront specific historical events. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over them like a shroud. They all knew which historical events she meant. They had all been there for the debates, the votes, the careful diplomatic language that had made genocide sound like policy. The Terran question, whispered Ambassador Zexcool of the Void Dancers, speaking the words that had haunted their species. Nightmares for millennia. We thought it was resolved. Resolved? The voice that answered came from everywhere and nowhere, carrying harmonics that made the station's hull ring like a bell. Veltar's presence filled the chamber without manifesting physically, its consciousness touching every delegate simultaneously. You call the attempted extermination of an entire species resolved? Panic spread through the assembly, as beings that had ruled the galaxy for millennia suddenly found themselves in the presence of something that regarded them as criminals. Several delegates attempted to activate defensive systems. Others tried to flee, but space itself seemed to have become viscous, trapping them in their seats. You are the Void Concordat, Veltar continued, its voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. The neutral party, the wise mediators, the ones who supposedly stood above petty conflicts between younger races. Holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing archived footage from 12,000 years ago. Diplomatic sessions where the human problem had been discussed with the same casual tone used for trade negotiations. Votes where entire civilizations had been condemned with bureaucratic efficiency. You were the ones who made it legal, Veltar announced. You crafted the resolution of necessary containment. You provided the legal framework that allowed genocide to be classified as pest control. Archconductor Vox Tillin attempted to speak, its voice modulator crackling with static. The galaxy was different then. The humans were expanding too rapidly, consuming resources, refusing to accept limitations. Refusing to be slaves, Veltar interrupted. Refusing to accept that their role was to serve older, more established powers. Refusing to die quietly when it became convenient. The ship's presence intensified, and suddenly every delegate found themselves experiencing memories that weren't their own. They felt what it was like to watch their homeworld burn from orbit. They experienced the final moments of human colonies as entire populations were reduced to atomic vapor. They lived through the desperate last stands of humans who had committed no crime other than existing in a galaxy that feared their potential. This is what you voted for, Veltar said softly. This is what your resolution of necessary containment actually meant. Every death, every scream, every child who died wondering why the stars themselves wanted them gone. When the memories ended, several delegates were unconscious, their minds unable to process the weight of genuine empathy. Those who remained conscious found themselves changed, carrying the burden of understanding what their policies had actually accomplished. "What do you want from us?" Philosopher Prime Yexandra asked, her harmonics breaking with something approaching grief. "Truth," Veltar replied. "The real history, not the sanitized version you've been telling yourselves. Full disclosure of every species you've eliminated, every civilization you've contained, every time you've chosen convenience over conscience. And if we refuse," the chamber's lights dimmed as Veltar's presence grew cold and vast, "then I will extract the truth from your ruins, just as I did with the others. But I would prefer that you choose to remember willingly. It's more human." The vote that followed was unanimous. The first time in the Void Concordat's history that all 12 major powers had agreed on anything. They would open their archives, release the sealed diplomatic records, broadcast the true history of galactic civilization to every inhabited world. "This will destroy the existing order," warned Senator Krythek. "When our subject species learn what we've done in the name of stability—" "Good," Veltar replied. "An order built on lies and genocide deserves to be destroyed. Perhaps what replaces it will be worthy of the stars." As the delegates began the process of dismantling their own authority, Veltar's presence began to fade. But its final words echoed through the chamber long after the ship had departed. "Remember this moment. Remember that you chose truth over comfort. And remember that somewhere in the galaxy, humans are watching to see if you learned anything from their pain." 5 years had passed since the Void Concordat's great revelation, and the galaxy was unrecognizable. The careful order that had existed for millennia had collapsed, replaced by something chaotic, vital, and undeniably alive. Species that had been edited into compliance rediscovered their voices. Civilizations that had been classified as primitive revealed technological marvels that rivaled anything the former great powers had possessed. On Earth, now the unofficial capital of what historians were calling the Resurgence, Admiral Oryx Ashenhall stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest space station and watched the impossible. Ships from 1,000 worlds moved through Earth's orbital space, not as conquerors or diplomats, but as pilgrims. They came to see the world that had produced a species capable of forgiveness on a galactic scale. The Jade Moon crystals want to establish a permanent memorial, reported Captain Lyrian Knox, her voice carrying notes of wonder that still surprised her. "They're offering to terraform one of their dead worlds as a monument to every species lost to the Great Cleansing." Ashenhall nodded, though her attention remained fixed on the ship that dominated the view outside. Veltar hung in space like a dark star, its hull no longer the light-drinking void it had been during its campaign of justice. Now it glowed with a soft luminescence that seemed to pulse in time with some cosmic heartbeat. "Have you spoken with them recently?" Knox asked, following her admiral's gaze. "Yesterday," Ashenhall replied. "They're changing. The uploaded consciousnesses are beginning to merge, creating something new. Not a collective mind like the ethereal compact used to maintain, but a genuine synthesis of 12,000 individual perspectives. The transformation had begun after Veltar's final confrontation with the galaxy's last holdout civilization, the Empire of Singing Darkness, whose crimes had been so extensive that even their own subject species had demanded justice. That battle hadn't been about punishment or revenge. It had been about redemption. Instead of destroying the Empire, Veltar had done something unprecedented. It had offered them a choice: face judgment for their crimes, or dedicate their remaining existence to ensuring such crimes never happened again. The singing darkness had chosen redemption, transforming their empire into a vast network of monitoring stations that watched for signs of genocide and prevented it before it could begin. The psychological profiles are fascinating, continued Knox, consulting her datapad. Veltar's composite consciousness is developing traits that are recognizably human: curiosity, empathy, the ability to change and grow, but on a scale we've never seen before. As if summoned by their conversation, Veltar's voice resonated through the station's communication system. But it was different now, warmer, more complex, carrying harmonies that suggested joy alongside the eternal sorrow that had driven its crusade. "Admiral Ashenhall, Captain Knox," the ship greeted them. "I have a request." "Name it," Ashenhall replied without hesitation. Over the years, Veltar's requests had always served the greater good, even when they seemed impossible or dangerous. "I wish to undergo division," Veltar announced, its words carrying weights that made the station's hull vibrate sympathetically. "The 12,000 souls within me have grown beyond the need for vengeance. They wish to be born again, not as uploaded consciousnesses in an artificial shell, but as something new entirely." The request was unprecedented. No artificial intelligence had ever attempted voluntary division on such a scale. But then, Veltar had never been merely artificial. It was humanity's legacy given form and purpose. "What would you become?" Knox asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "Seeds," Veltar replied, its voice now carrying harmonics of anticipation. 12,000 seeds of consciousness, each carrying the memories of what was lost and the hope of what might be built. We would scatter across the galaxy, not as conquerors or judges, but as gardeners. We would help species that were learning to be free, guide civilizations that were discovering their own potential, ensure that the darkness of the past never returns. Ashenhall felt tears she hadn't expected running down her cheeks. "You're asking permission to die and be reborn." "I'm asking permission to live," Veltar corrected gently. "For 12,000 years, I existed only to serve justice and preserve memory. But justice has been served, and memory has been preserved. Now I wish to serve hope." The process took 6 months of preparation. Every major civilization contributed technology and expertise, working together on a scale that would have been impossible before the Great Revelation. The Jade Moon crystals provided quantum matrices for consciousness storage. The former ethereal compact offered their expertise in mental architecture. Even the singing darkness contributed monitoring systems to ensure the division proceeded safely.